Welcome to High Stakes, episode 20. I'm your host, Neil Orfield. You can find me on Twitter at PlayerQDFS. The producer of High Stakes is Mike Lawrence. You can find him on Twitter at Awesemo. And my guest today is a friend of mine. You can find him on Twitter at BlenderHD. He's better known by his name Blender than his actual name, which is Jordan Cooper. I'm excited to have Jordan on. Jordan is a big DFS winner with a stated goal of winning $50,000 to $70,000 a year. He's also very transparent, shows his rotor tracker frequently, so I know that he actually has made a little bit more than that over the last several years. He's a massive DFS winner. His most recent big win being an MMA, winning over $100,000. Jordan is also the person who has said the most words to me on streams because I am the regular co-host of the regular guest, I guess, of the Theory of DFS podcast. I just counted up. I've been on 17 episodes with Blender. The constant feedback we get, some people love the show, but the other feedback that we get is I don't do a lot of the talking. Jordan does much more of the talking than I do. But I'm excited to have Blender on the show today because maybe this will be my opportunity to get some more words in, ask some more questions. I'll start with the listener question, Blender. Pete asks, how does it feel to become the hunted as Neil becomes the host and hunter in this situation? And will Neil allow Jordan a word in edgeways? I've already got my quota in for words in this podcast. Blender, how do you feel being the guest? It's a little different dynamic for us.
I don't think it matters that much. I think even on the Theory of DFS podcast, you end up asking me questions as it is, right? I talk about something and you go, well, what about this? And then you respond back. And I mean, that podcast is meant to be my own podcast. I mean, like people don't seem to understand that I could just do that solo if I wanted to, but it's like when me and Eric started it, almost 2 years ago during football season, it's like, why don't just me and you have a conversation over the past slate and our strategic decisions as two sharp, profitable DFS players? And no matter what, it's a high-level discussion. And if I talk a lot, so be it. If he talks a lot, it is what it is. And my favorite response to me coming on the show is exactly what I would have thought, is that you just ran out of guests.
No, I'm excited to have you on. I think it's funny because people give that feedback a lot, and honestly, I think that the conversations that we have on Theory of DFS is exactly how our conversations would go, just one-on-one. Like if we were having conversations in person, because that's kind of my personality. Is I ask a lot of questions, and when people bring up concepts, I'm curious to hear more. So I'm constantly asking you questions because I want to hear more about your thoughts. And then people are like, well, why is Neil not giving his opinion on anything? And that's sort of the way my conversations typically go, is I'm going to be asking a lot of questions. And you have a lot to say, and you are a natural teacher. So I think that, on these shows, you're teaching people. So that's part of the reason that it goes the way it does, is because we don't plan the conversations ahead of time. You have ideas that you want to talk about, and you have a lot to say about these ideas. So I think that it just naturally comes to be you having much more to say than I do, because you're bringing new concepts to me, oftentimes things that I haven't thought about at all. And my response is, I have questions for you. So it's funny that we get that feedback a lot that I don't get to say enough, because I oftentimes will get that feedback when I feel like, there are sometimes we have episodes where I come off of it feeling like, I didn't say that much this episode. I didn't have a lot of energy on this episode. I probably didn't bring enough to the table. Other times I feel great about it. Like I feel like I got in all the questions I wanted. We had a smart conversation, and we still get that feedback. Why doesn't Neil ever say anything? So I guess that's just our personalities. That's that's what it's going to be.
Well, people take it as like as my wife will say, it's like people don't realize how not an asshole you are, like you portray yourself as. And I think Ben Pritchett put it very nicely. He tweeted like maybe 3 or 4 years ago. He's like, I have no problem talking to anyone and sharing literally everything that I know, because that's what I'm passionate about. And it allows me to bounce ideas. I formulate things and then go, okay, well, what about this way? What about that way? And then I want to hear pushback, but of course I'm from New York, so I'd rather you just interrupt me and go, oh, hold on. What have you thought about it this way? And I go, maybe I haven't thought about it that way. So it's not a matter of like, maybe I do come across as like, oh, I'm a know-it-all. It's like, I freely admit I don't know it all. The whole point of me blurting out and talking about things is to work out problems and seeing if I could get there through a certain line of thinking, and having someone else there that I respect to go, well, that's right. That may not be right. This could be better. And then going from there. But I mean, that also just is a byproduct of me, I end up talking 80% of the time.
Yeah. And I think some people have the impression that I'm afraid to push back. And like, I'm not at all afraid to push back. If I disagree with you, I'll push back right away. It's just a lot of the time it's new concepts to me, or I just don't disagree with you. Like, what you're saying sounds pretty smart. I think I agree with what you're saying. Sometimes, if I do have a disagreement, or I think you might be wrong, maybe you're overlooking something, I will bring it up. But that's just, I'm not going to force in a disagreement if I agree with you. So I don't know. But I have really enjoyed doing the show. As I said, 17 episodes. I have been the guest now. There have been 80 episodes in total. And the funny thing is, I think now I've been 17. I counted up. I think Eric has been the guest for 27. Eric Beinfor was the regular recurring guest to begin with for 27 of them. But there was a big period there where you had a bunch of different guests on regularly, which frankly, I enjoyed that. I think a lot of the audience enjoyed hearing from a lot of different people, similar to this show. So, I mean, a lot of people, I think, started to get the impression that the Theory of DFS was meant to be kind of like this show with a, rotating guest cast, which it's fun in its own way, but it's more work to bring in different guests every week. Actually, let me ask, I put this question at the end, but I'm going to ask it right here. Since we're already talking about the Theory of DFS, what do you believe is the best episode of the Theory of DFS podcast ever?
The one with Nerdy Tenor, easily. That's a 3-hour episode. And to talk to someone like Daniel, who, pro poker tools, like he comes from poker solvers. So like from that background of finding like really just running the numbers and seeing like with all the decision nodes that you could make and all the possible ranges of outcomes, given this game dynamic, what is the optimal choice? What's the expected values of all your choices? And that's not something that I can do computer wise. And he programs the way that I think. So like I'm trying to get to where he gets to intuitively in some way. And and the thing is that we've had a lot of conversations where he's programming things that he doesn't know why the algorithm, he doesn't even know why the algorithm is spitting certain things out. And I find it very validating when what he spits out equates to, the game theory concepts that I ascribe to. And I'm like, okay, so I am going in the directionally correct way, maybe not as precise as he is. And as always with him, he doesn't know whether or not his stuff is good either. I mean, like, it's like based on all the projections and all the ownership and all the data that he has, we simulate these contests out a million times, this lineup here, that lineup there, and this is what the constructions look like. Utilizing that to then learn how to play the game. I mean, that's like the completely opposite end of the approach that I have. So, I mean, I've listened back to that episode before just to hear and go, how can I utilize what he is doing on a programming level in a more how do I hack together my process to kind of simulate that?
Yep. And I actually knew, I was pretty confident what your answer was going to be, because I think we actually talked about this after I had him on High Stakes. On the next episode of Theory of DFS, you said to me, that was your best episode ever. And when he was on the Theory of DFS, that was also my best episode ever. So I think he's a very fascinating player, because he's doing something that I think we all would dream to be able to create a program that does machine learning and, comes up with correlations and tells us how to play the game naturally. That's kind of the dream for us. And I also feel like there's just so much to learn from, like, if you study his lineups, like, sometimes if I have a question about, like, am I stacking the right way? Should I be running, 5 3 stacks in MLB, or should I be running 4 4 stacks? That kind of thing. I feel like there's value in looking at the lineups that he's doing, because he's not telling us to do those correlations. It's his machine learning that's telling him to do those correlations. So I find him to be a fascinating guest as well. And
I think if you could combine him and Whistles, I think that would be the best DFS player ever.
What do you think the difference is between him and Whistles?
Well, because Whistles is optimization guru, and Daniel doesn't come from necessarily that background, because he's running everything. True. like they're related, but I don't think that, I do not think they're doing anywhere close to the same types of things. I think Whistles is using mostly publicly available stuff, and then like based on correlation and ranges of outcomes, putting together the highest EV lineups that he could possibly make in a portfolio. While Nerdy Tenor's process, I think, is much more game theory oriented, and like he mentions that it has like it's lineups that are competing against each other to the point of an equilibrium. I don't think that's part of what Whistles does, but of course, I'm speaking from a context of like I don't have a PhD in mathematics, so maybe they are doing something similar, but they don't at least describe it that way.
Yeah, and Whistles also isn't quite as much of an open book as Nerdy Tenor is. I feel like Nerdy Tenor shared a lot more of his process than Whistles did, and maybe Whistles would have been willing to go into it a little bit more than I got him to talk about it on this show. I didn't force the issue that much because I know that he plays it a little bit close to the chest. He doesn't want to be sharing everything. He did share on the show that his process also involves machine learning. So both of them have machine learning as part of their process, which at this point is one of those terms that like I'm really fascinated by it. It sounds like something that I'm like, man, I wish I could do machine learning, and I don't really understand exactly how it works. I think I have an idea of what it means and why it's valuable, because it's, for example, you don't put in the correlations, your machine learns itself that correlation should be involved, but I have no idea how to do that. It's kind of above my head. It's one of those things that's just fascinating to me hearing people talk about it.
I've tried to do machine learning. What I've done is I've taken a Roomba vacuum cleaner and then just like put lineups around the house, and then whatever it knocks into, those are the lineups that I play. That's the closest I've gotten to machine learning. It's not doing very well.
It's not working so far?
No.
I mean, small sample size, I'm sure. It's just a small sample size issue. You'll get there over time.
It's a smaller house. I need to get a bigger house so I could play more lineups.
That's right. Yeah, because you don't even play 150 because your house isn't big enough to.
Right. That's the main reason I don't play 150. I don't play 150 because I'm only doing it in my office, and it's like I need to extend it. I need to get a mansion. If I could afford a mansion, then I could play 150 lineups.
Well, that answers Buford DFS asked why you don't play 150 lineups when clearly there are only 150 good lineups you can play in a contest. So I guess that answers the question for him. We don't need to go back to that question. While we're talking about machine learning a little bit, I'm curious if you have an opinion. How many DFS players do you think have machine learning as part of their process?
How the hell would I know? I have no idea. I don't even know that not the same machine learning that I'm doing with my Roomba. Sure, or I could do it with my mother-in-law got a similar like a lawnmower. My wife just told me to like yesterday, like she got an automatic lawnmower for whatever. Like it's like okay, like she's upgrading. Maybe she can. Now I can play 300 lineups. Yeah,
I mean in different contests, of course, you wouldn't play them.
Of course, obviously.
Naturally. Okay. All right. Well, we got sidetracked immediately right there, but let's get back to the usual questions that I start with guests, which is just a little bit of background information about you. I think generally most of my guests kind of know you. For the most part of people are watching my shows, they probably know you because we do a lot of shows together, but maybe it's a different audience. Maybe there are some, part of the Stokastic audience doesn't know you as well. So let's talk about your background just a little bit. I mean, you just said that you don't really have much background in statistics, but I'll just ask anyway, what kind of background do you have in statistics or probability? Do you have any formal or informal training?
I mean, I was an AP honors math student. So like, other than that, I'm a high school dropout. Not necessarily because of I didn't do well in school. I just thought it was pointless. I joined a startup during the first .com boom. So like I was in high school like late like 97, 98, and I was an intern at the NYU Technology Research Center. And they were doing like artificial intelligence. They were doing stuff that's way advanced. I mean, even now it would be advanced, but back then, so there I taught myself web design and web development because I was always a computer nerd anyway. So like I had a computer at home. I learned basic, kind of little languages. Power user on Windows, MS DOS, or whatever it is. Batch processing jobs, little terminal commands, anything like that. the old school internet, dialing into BBSs and telnetting, and of course you're downloading pirated games like you do when you're a teenager. But from there, like I took some classes at community college because obviously parents were like, hey, you should get a degree or something like that. But then I ended up with a job on Wall Street as a front end web developer for basically stock trading sites and financial firms. So like I had to learn. Basically, you're gonna ask me about computer programming. It's like I have old school web development skills, which probably don't matter as much now. So HTML and JavaScript and Perl, Cold Fusion, SQL, enough. Back then, I mean, I would have to read stuff up to do stuff now 20 years later. But pretty much I learned in doing that, like the UX conversion side of front end development. So like I can't build anything. I can't build a front end like the optimizer, like Fantasy Cruncher, but I could design it. I could do like the website for calls to action. Like it was all business oriented metrics, because when you're dealing with a stock trading site, like it's all about ease and error checking, and because people are trying to 100 shares of this stock, they're looking to short it or something like that, it has to make sure that it works. And back then especially, like it cost millions of dollars to run those sites, right? Because of the back end work, and it has to tie in with the stock market. So like I learned a lot of programming to at least it's more linear based programming, because you're doing it more for design and development purposes. Mm-hmm. But combine that with my, like I was a good math student. I played games well. I played poker for a living for a while. So like that's kind of, I piece things together and learn on my own very well, really just to get to the point in which it accomplishes the tasks that I need for it to accomplish.
Okay, so you just answered a couple of my questions in one. You talked about your background in computer programming, your background in statistics. You mentioned that you were a high school dropout, which I didn't know that. And that's an interesting thing that I think, so this is episode 20. I've had at least 5 or 6 people who are either high school dropouts or college dropouts, or, finished high school and never went on. A lot of people that have been on the show have not gone on to higher education. It's kind of a spectrum of people who, you say you dropped out of high school, and then we have people who have, advanced degrees, multiple advanced degrees. It's a spectrum, but it seems like that's a pretty high proportion of people who dropped out of high school have been very successful at DFS. Do you have any opinion about why that might be, or do you think it's just a small sample size on this show?
Well, I think it's correlation does not imply causation type of thing. Like when people talk about like the commonly cited statistic of like people with a college degree make X amount of more money over their lifetime than people without a college degree. No, it's that smart driven people make more money than people that aren't smart and driven, and more of the smart people that are smart and driven go to college than ones that don't go to college. Doesn't mean that like, well, if I replaced myself and I said, what happens if instead of I dropped out of my senior year and joined a startup, that I just finished college, went to 4-year university, and then got a job like that? Like, what doesn't matter that much? And especially in fields where experience matters more than a degree, like especially during that time, the .com boom. Like if you had a resume that you could, like you had experience doing these, software and programming languages, they were hiring everyone. So what ended up happening is that I had 2 friends that got computer science degrees. They went to college, I didn't. And 4 years later, when they're out of college, I'm the one that helps them get a job, because I'm the one that has the connections and the experience, where like all they have is a degree. And it's like, and you go to these interviews and they're like, well, show me what you've done. And it's like, well, I really haven't done anything, because I've just been learning in college. And especially in the computer fields, a lot of what's taught in college in computer science is not actually applicable in practice in how reality is. So like for me, like I learned all this stuff kind of on my own, because that's what I enjoyed doing, building little websites and for my own projects. And I think it's just a byproduct that like So I'm not a high school dropout and like, oh my God, I flunked out of school. It's more of a, I didn't want to show up to class anymore because it was pointless and boring. And I was also the type of student where just give me, if this is a history class, right? Okay. What are we going to learn this semester? Okay. Is it all in this book? Yes. Okay. So give me the book. I'll be back in 4 months. Give me the final. I'll get a 95 plus on the final. And if that's all that matters, right? If that's all that matters is that I retain this knowledge for some reason, why do I have to show up every day for 40 minutes for you to lecture me on a chapter that we read last night? It's like just give me then make the test harder. If I can't do that. But that was, to me, that was the main issue of like, I didn't mind learning stuff that I didn't care about, but I'd rather do other stuff. So when I had that internship, I was getting high school credit for it, but I had to take high school classes while I was interning. And it was more fun to go to a tech center that had like computers that were 7 million times more powerful than my own at home and a broadband connection. Because back then we had like 6K dial-up modem. It's like, dude, I got a T1 connection and a powerful computer. And basically my only job for the internship was to cover the front desk for when the administrative assistant, because it was a research center. They had no job for me there. So it's like, get involved in whatever project you want, or just, they had a media studio. I learned video production there. They had a full like with green screens and audio stuff and all this software that I could never afford. So it's like, okay, for my social studies project, I made like a 60-second presidential commercial because it was some type of during the presidential election. And I brought it into class and people, they pop the tape in and it's like, what the hell is this? How the hell did you make this? It's like, well, because what else am I going to do when all I have to do is like from 1:30 to 2:30, just cover the phones in the front desk and just say, okay, I'll take a message for you. And then I still have a computer and I'm still browsing the internet while I'm doing that.
So it wasn't lack of motivation is what I'm hearing. It sounds like you were always kind of a hard worker. I mean, you just didn't want to do what people were telling you should do in school. Is that kind of, I mean, I posited when I brought up this conversation with RBX 88, the reason, and I kind of have the impression that, maybe it's people who are willing to drop out of school are more like thinking outside the box. Like everybody will tell you, you got to finish high school, you got to go to college, and you're more, I'm willing to think outside the box, and I'm also not extremely risk averse because, maybe it is actually not more risky to drop out of college, but you certainly had the perception when you're 18, or at least I did, that you can't drop out of high school or drop out of college. Like, what are you going to do? That's a huge risk. So to me, would you agree with that maybe that's a common trait among people? You disagree?
Well, I disagree with that sentiment. I think it's more risky to do that. I think going to college and getting a regular desk job or something, middle management or whatever, I think that's more risky. I think, right. I personally think that you're, I'll go up the ladder. It's like, you get laid off at any time. To me, it's more risky to rely on other people than it is to rely on yourself. So bet on yourself. But I'm not one of these like hustle porn type of people. It's just that my whole goal since I was 23 years old, essentially, has been how do I never have a quote real job? And throughout the entire time, even from before then, it's like, what do I enjoy spending my time doing? And then I do that and I go, how do I make money doing this? Right? Because it's not a matter of how do I get rich? It's like, how do I not have to do something else while I do the thing that I enjoy doing? So figuring that out each and every time. So like the amount of things I've done throughout my lifetime, I mean, I must sound like, some people say you sound like the most interesting person in the history of the world because of all the areas that I've been in over the past 25 years. I mean, I was trying to run fantasy basketball and baseball leagues when I was 14 years old, like as a service, I'll compute your stats and everything like that. That little business venture failed, but like I would find these little things that I enjoyed to do. And then how do I make money doing that? Oh, I stand-up comedy. Okay, I did stand-up comedy professionally. I poker professionally, web development, web design. I was a baseball umpire, making good money. I was at 16, 17, 18 years old, making like $300-400 a week. umpiring baseball games. And of course, compared to my friends, I'm sitting there going like, well, I can afford to do whatever the hell I want to do. Yeah. Right. And just doing that throughout the course of my life. DFS, right? I ran a video game website for like 3 years. We made money doing that. It's like, I just bounce around. It's like, what's the thing that I enjoy doing? And then how do I make enough money? The key is not to make the most amount of money, but how do I make enough money that I could pay my bills and have a comfortable lifestyle so that I don't have to do something I don't like in order to pay those bills. So that's where that $50,000 to $75,000 kind of thing comes from, especially since I live here in Louisville and not in New York anymore, much lower standard of living. Yeah. It's like, so that's where the knit mentality. I mean, I don't think I'm that risk averse. It's just that my goals are just pretty modest.
Right. So I feel like I didn't send you my questions today. I didn't tell you what I was going to ask, but you're still answering all of my questions before I get there. My next question was just going to be, tell me about your professional background prior to DFS or any related hobbies. You just covered you did comedy.
I listened to the show, Neil. Dude, I listened to 19 episodes. I know what you're going to ask.
Yeah, that's fair. But I don't even always ask the question about tell me about your professional. That was new last week. Anything else you want to say about your professional background or related hobbies? Or is that
not really? It's just that
I mean, you kind of covered it,
right? And I also, while playing DF, like I've only been playing technically, if you want to call it full time, since COVID, since the pandemic. Mm-hmm. Like if you want to call it that, like since 2011, I ran my own business. I had a partner, digital marketing, basically web design and digital marketing, mostly for local businesses. So like the non-sexy type of stuff, the plumbing supply company, the real estate agents, lawyers, like anything that's more local based, not e-commerce style, even though I can do that. So over the course of, from 2011, we had up to 20 clients at a time at points. I mean, we started small and, at a point in like 2016, 2017, and I started playing DFS in 2015, we were up to about 20 clients, and I was working 6 to 8 hours a day on these clients. And then obviously there are meetings that you have to go to around town and calls and everything, and basically doing web design, SEO, email marketing, social media, AdWords, Facebook ads, and that's my specialty. I've been doing that. I've been using the Google AdWords platform since before it was even AdWords. So since 2001. So like I go way back, and because of the when I was working on Wall Street, it was all focused on this UX and conversion. Like I just took that to like, how do I apply that to small businesses and make it so that it's the simplest things of like, well, when I there's a dentist that has a website, and then on the front page they don't have a phone number. It's like, well, what do you expect people to do? They got to call you, right? Let's put your phone number there. Like it's some of the most simple things, and then testing stuff. So I'm used to downloading, Excel spreadsheets for all these marketing campaigns and A/B testing. So like my Excel knowledge kind of comes like at a 3 out of 10 comes from that, but I'm not usually doing much computational stuff in Excel. It's just more visualization of just like, let me download all this stuff and see what days work, what things work here, and just, okay, I could look at a chart, and then you print it out for the clients, and then you could go over it with them. So like during that entire period, I had clients, but I worked primarily from home unless I had to go to a meeting. So like playing DFS and studying CSVs throughout the day, eventually, my 6 to 8 hours of client work turned into like 2 to 4 hours a day. Like I'll get this done, get this done, and then I have 4 hours. It's like, okay, time to study stuff for DFS for the day. And then by like 2008, 2019, I just pretty much stopped like soliciting for clients. Now it gets to the point, a lot of these local businesses, that I tell them it's like a 2 to 3 year plan. I said because my business model was based on a monthly retainer. So they didn't have to come back. It's like, you pay me like a cable bill. If I have more work to do in 1 month than another, then you get the benefit. But certain months, then I'm not doing that much, but you're just paying one fee. But I tell them, he said, after about 3 years, you don't really need me anymore. It's like, I'm more than welcome to have you as a client, but I'm going to just tell you that there's nothing really more than I can do for you, especially for this price, right? You could if you want to go to a bigger agency, I would refer people to that. But it's just, I'm trying to get you a certain point. So we'd have some overlap, and most of our clients would last 3 to 5 years. So like once you stop soliciting for new clients, then 20 goes down to 15, goes down to 13, goes down to 12. And I was doing so well in DFS and then kind of doing content in the industry also for a little bit of recurring revenue as well, because you want to, diversify your income streams as much as possible. Then by the time COVID hit, I only had like 3 or 4 clients left. So I still had 3 or 4 clients, and then basically COVID, all of them basically said, we have to severely like cut our budget for now at least. And I kind of lost all those clients, but I kind of was waiting to lose those clients to begin with.
Kind of good timing, yeah.
Right. It's like these were all clients that didn't need me anymore. I mean, I literally told them like 6 months prior, it's like, you don't really need me anymore. But they're like, no, we've done so well with what you do. It's like, okay, but just understand, I'm not really doing that much work anymore. Like I could hand this off to someone in your office to kind of just make sure nothing blows up. And if you want at that point, once a year, once every 6 months, to pay me for an hour or 2 at a time, just to make sure that everything's still set up correctly, that's perfectly fine with me. And a lot of them are just like, nope, we're fine with it. And then, but at that point, especially two out of the 4 were like travel and tourism type of stuff. Like that basically they said that like, well, no one's coming. So like, what's the point? And that's pretty much when, well, I have no more client work anymore, even though I was only working like maybe 5 to 6 hours a week on those. So it wasn't that much work to begin with, but that's kind of my full background of what I do. I mean, that we'd spend most of the time on that.
Yeah, I mean, we could go all day just talking about your background. Talking about your background kind of brings up a question that I had, because you talked about how you had the goal as an adult to never take a regular job working for somebody else. You also have the goal in DFS to make $50,000 to $70,000 a year, just have this be your regular salary, regular income. How important do you think it is in DFS as a DFS player to have a goal in mind for how you're playing?
I think it's important. I mean, it should for anything. I mean, you should have a goal for anything that you do. And I'm not, if people talk about, you need to have dreams and stuff like that. It's like what my dream is never having a real job. Okay. Like that is a reasonable dream, right? People have dreams of like, I want to be an astronaut. No, I want to be an all-star basketball player. I'm 43 years old. That ain't going to happen. Right. So something that's reachable, that you can realistically see yourself doing. Because I think the problem with people that have too lofty dreams is that I'm not talking about the people that are like the visionary type people, but every ordinary average person, their dreams are so far away in their head that there seems to be no realistic steps to take to reach them. That being more reasonable with your dream that you would still be really happy achieving is much better. And it's, people call it periodic steps of like, have a small goal and then the next goal and then the next goal. But even if you think in that mentality, calling it a small goal means that you really have a different goal, right? Like, but people in DFS, it's like, oh, I'd like to turn $100 into $1,000. That's a small goal. It's like, so once you get to $1,000, you quit DFS. They go, well, no. Said so that's not your goal. Your goal, like, so why are you trying to get $100 into $1,000? It's like, well, so I could turn $1,000 into $10,000. Okay, so would you be happy at the end of it to have $10,000? Said no, because I would turn that. I want to win $1 million. Like, so that is your goal. So like, you're lying to yourself in your head. Like me, I'm not lying to myself when I say, if I could just make $50,000 to $70,000 a year doing DFS or just doing something that I love, it doesn't have to be DFS. 5 years from now, maybe I'm gone. Maybe I'm doing something else. Like, to me, that's realistic, and I'm legitimately happy, right? Yeah. would I love to make $5 million a year? Would I love to have 50 billion? Sure, yeah, okay. But in the back of my head, that's not my goal. The fact that I get to do this, what we're doing every day. I mean, what shouldn't that be the goal? I mean, like there are tons of people listening right now that have a job that they hate, and they're like, I want to be like the guys that I watch on Stokastic. Right? They get to talk about baseball. They get paid to do all this. A lot of times they don't realize how little you get paid in comparison. That it's not something that you could necessarily, buy a house with or anything, or pay a mortgage even. But it is an income stream. And they're like, oh, I want to be one of those. I want to be one of those people. It's like, well, if that is your goal, that is attainable. But if you're thinking in terms of I want to be Alex Baker, and I want to be the top DFS player in the world, and I want to have $100,000 screenshots and $1 million profit, it's like that's probably not attainable. And if you want to be that, and you're starting from a position of knowing very little about statistics and probability, knowing very little about computer programming, knowing very little about game theory, it's like, what possible steps can you take? And then what ends up happening to 99% of people is that they try to find the shortcuts. They're like, there's no, so when I tell people, I mean, people call me condescending because some people ask very, very rudimentary, very fundamental questions about the very basics of DFS. And I have to tell them, I said, you'd be much better off, go on Khan Academy, go on, the Coursera or something like that, and literally just take probability and statistics classes. If you want to go to your local college, community college or something like that, said you'd be much better off doing that and spend 6 months. Don't even play DFS. Just spend 6 months doing that just so you even understand just the basic concepts of what an average is. What the very core things that if you don't just even get it on a conceptual level, I can't possibly see how you could be successful at DFS. And what ends up happening is that people don't do it because they're like, well, I want the chart. Why can't I just look at this chart and it'll tell me what to do? And that you have to learn how to read the chart, because the chart isn't even saying what you think it's saying, because you don't understand the mathematical concepts of how those numbers even come about.
Let me take a minute away from this conversation with Jordan Cooper to tell you about our sponsor, NoHost Advantage. NoHost Advantage is bringing you a different way to enjoy DFS with player props contests. It's 100% peer-to-peer to help level the playing field, with over 500 player props offered. All new users get a $25 deposit bonus with promo code Awesemo. That's AWESEMO. NoHost Advantage has mass entry capability with big prize pools. Beat your friends, not the house. Use our NoHost Advantage projections and optimal lineup tool to help you take down big prizes. Download in the App Store or play on nohostadvantage.com. So Blender, you said that your goal for 2022 was to make $50,000 to $70,000, and in January you had an MMA win for like $110,000. So
no, that wasn't January. That was last year.
Are you? I think it was this year because I made a joke.
Not 100. No. I think I had like 40,000 in MMA, and then I also had like a 45,000 in NBA in March.
All right. So you exceeded your goal by March. So did you stop playing DFS for the year?
No, because I mean it's one long game. So it's like when I say $50,000 to $70,000 a year, that's an average, right? Because we're playing. Because it's just like poker. When people say, like in poker, my goal is to make X amount of dollars per hour. Typically judge it by an hourly rate. But like if you buy in for $500 and then you win a couple of hands or something, and 2 hours later you have $700. It's like, are you going to get up? It's like, well, you made $200 for the night. Isn't that good? And people do that. People say, well, I'm up this and I'm going to go. I'm like, well, tell me what the difference is. If it's now 10 o'clock at night, you started at 8 o'clock at night. If you showed up tomorrow and the same game was here with the same people and the same stack sizes in this cash game in poker, would you think this is a good game, a profitable game to make money? And they'd go, absolutely. This is a very soft game. I said, so why aren't you sitting down now? Like, what's the difference between you cashing out now, walking around the block, and then sitting back down at 10:30, and you're just calling it tomorrow? Like there is no difference. Either you're in a profitable situation or you're not in a profitable situation. And in fact, the more skillful you are, the more events you want to happen, the more trials, the more you want the largest sample size possible. So I can understand if the game isn't good anymore, right? I can understand if all of a sudden all the worst players busted out and now it's 5-handed with mostly, nits and good players that you're not going to get much money from. Yeah, get up then. No matter if you're up or down, even if you're down $500, get up there. The game's not good anymore. So to me, that's how I think of things, of like, just because I'm up, $60,000 in 2 months, like, are the games not good anymore? It's like, no, the games are just as good as when I won the money. So why wouldn't I continue to play like I would normally play and hope on average? Like I had a year like 2 years ago where, it wasn't that profitable that year. And it's only because of that year dynamic, right? You shift the year 3 months.
Yeah.
Like, and do it for every three, like if you go from October to, like, I started playing October 2015. If I would go from October 2015 to July 2016 as the 12-month period, every year I've been massively profitable. But because that 3-month shift, I had one 12-month period that happened to be a calendar year of January through December that it was like low 5 figures instead of like mid 5 figures or even 6 figures. So it's like looking like that, especially if you're treating your bankroll as a bankroll and not something to just go out and I'm going to spend money on a BMW for no reason, like that type of thing. Like I could go, if I have a year with no profit, that's perfectly fine, because I've had a year where I had $200,000 worth of profit. So that counts to me on average for like 3 years worth of income that I'm not, obviously the government's getting some of it, but I'm not outspent. I live pretty frugally, comfortably, but frugally. I mean, like I have one pair of shoes. I wear, pajamas and boxer shorts. I wear a hat until it goes. I'm not a stylish person. Me and my wife have one car, right? Like the only thing that we maybe splurge on is that, okay, so we'll get Uber Eats or something. We'll pay for a delivery service, kind of like the time saving type of things that we have money that, some of the, it's you pay a gardener to do the lawn type of thing. Like I'm not like that much of a nit like that, but we're not, we go on vacations, we go to wrestling events. Like that's kind of what I spend my money on. But for the most part, like pretty much, the bills are paid, and yeah, I subscribe to a lot of subscriptions. So maybe I have Paramount Plus when I don't watch anything. Well, I watch Picard, and I pay $9.99 a month, even though I forgot about it. And like those are the types of things that, yes, but I'm not going through credit card statements going, let me take this off and let me take that off types of things. But what I describe, I believe, is attainable, is realistically attainable. And that's kind of that's the perspective from where I teach from, that I am not special. I didn't get a degree in math or finance or any of this. Yes, I do have a mathematical mind. I do have experience. When you're playing poker and you're playing 30 hands an hour live, or God knows how many online, you're constantly making EV decisions. Like you're in the mindset of just the concept of expected value, that like everything your brain is trained that way. Okay. So to look at DFS as a game of expected value, even if you can't compute the actual numbers, like why can't you play the game better than most of the average players? And getting up to that level isn't as hard as it looks like, especially with tools like the ones at Stokastic. Like, dude, as long as you understand how those numbers are made, so you understand the context and what you're looking at, just the concepts of that, why couldn't you be profitable to the extent of what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
So with that, I don't think that's controversial.
Okay. So say your goal, for what percentage of people do you think it is a realistic goal to make $50,000 to $70,000 a year if you're willing to put in the work?
100%. I mean, what
100% of people are capable of.
No, okay, maybe not 100, but not. Trust me, I deal with a lot of dumb people. So no, I know that it's not 100%. And obviously, if we take this to the extreme, there have to be losers.
Yeah.
In DFS, right? So like, if everyone had the same knowledge, we'd all lose to the rake, right?
Yep.
So it'll get to a point where yes, the games are too tough to beat beyond the rake. But I rely on the fact, and I've said this on the Theory of DFS podcast, and I've said this on a lot of shows, that I have no problem being 100% transparent, 99.999% transparent, because I do not give out my exact MMA fighter rating numbers, only because those are the actual numbers I plug into an optimizer. So I don't want people to, especially in a dupe type of contest, not to build the exact line. They're probably going to be close.
A question from Jonah Shifty asked exactly that question. What is your exact formula? So I can X out that question now.
Right, that's the only thing I want. Like, but I'm not joking. I think that's literally the only thing. I'll even share the Excel spreadsheet. I'll share, as long as you don't have my formulas. Like, you could build anything you want, but you gotta weigh the things in the way that you gotta do little simulations that I do and put the numbers in the right spots. So I go through, here's my methodology, but I ain't gonna tell you how much I'm weighting this, only because you're gonna come out with the same number as me and then plug that in. And the highest leverage lineup I think is supposed to be unique, and then it ends up being duped 7 times because everyone has the same numbers in there. So I can't do that. But other than that, I'm 100% transparent. I teach everything. Like, there's nothing, and like, here's all the edge. Here's it all. I'll go through experiments. Like, I'm trying this. I'm trying to find an edge there. I'm trying to find an edge there. 2 reasons. One, is that if I don't do it, someone else will. Same thing happened in poker. Like, it's Super System, Doyle Brunson. Of course, that's way dated now. Or Theory of Poker. Or the Dan Harrington tournament books, all the stuff like that. I read all of them. I read all the poker books. The mathematics of poker. Someone's going to do it. And someone's going to do it, and they're going to make money doing it. So like, then why the hell? Why shouldn't it be me? Right? Yep. Am I the greatest player? No. David Slansky wasn't the greatest poker player, but he was a great Theory of Poker teacher. Right? Doyle Brunson ain't the greatest poker player ever, right? And even his book isn't even the great teaching, but for that time period in the late 70s, that was a great teaching tool. So it's not about being the best player. And of course, I'm saying this with Alex, being, well, he's not the number 1 player anymore. Maybe he'll get there by the end of the year. But he's not trying anymore. I mean, I think that's right.
Part of him stepping back a little bit is he's not trying to chase that.
I think you don't mind learning from a top 2 player in the world for 4 years. Like,
right.
I think that's good enough. But what the 2 points that I was making is, one, someone else would do it anyway, right? So the information is going to come out maybe a little bit sooner than it would. And then the more important thing is the second point, is that no matter how much of that information is out there, 95% of people won't do it.
So I mean, I just asked the question. You said 100% of people are capable of. So you think that most people are just deciding not to? They are capable of following your advice. All the advice. I mean, you are, as you say, 99.99% transparent. And I do shows with you. I know how transparent you are. You are very willing to tell people exactly what, the way you think about different problems. You think that most people are capable of following your advice, but not willing?
That's correct. I mean, a lot of times on my early morning shows, if there's like an early slate or something in baseball, I will literally make my lineups live on, and exactly what I did. Like, this is what I look at. I'm talking through everything. Of course, for the course of a show, it's like a 45-minute to 60-minute show. It'll take me normally 10 minutes to do it, but because I'm explaining everything, it's like, okay, these are I'm doing some single entries. I'm doing this. I'm making a build of 40 lineups for this, and I'll just do it because here's the content. Do you want to learn from this? Here, this is what I do. But what ends up happening is, for 95% of people, since they have not taken the time to learn the concept, the mathematical concepts, that they view things in terms of like, what are the settings for an optimizer?
Right.
Right. It's like, well, no, he's teaching us the settings. And it's like, oh. So do you play a 5-3 stack or a 4-4 stack? And I'm like, well, it depends. right? It's the same thing in poker. It's like, okay, what do you do with ace queen under the gun +1? I'm like, that in and of itself doesn't tell me anything, right? You're not telling me formats of games, stats. I mean, so the fact that you're asking that question means that you don't even understand the fundamentals of like, here are all the variables you have to weigh into your decisions, right? If you don't understand that there are variables and what you have to weigh, you start thinking in black and whites. Oh, you got to play this, you can't play that. You got to do this. And no good DFS player, if you talk to them, will ever give you the common parlance in poker is that, you know, every answer to a poker question is, it depends.
Yep.
And the same thing exists in DFS. Right, right. So the types of people that don't understand it depends are that's the 95% of people. The people that once you say it depends go, well, then they'll ask, what does it depend on? I'll say, well, here are the things it depends on. And they go, but why do those things depend on those things? And now you start to piece all these concepts together. And then now you could look at a slate tomorrow, just like every poker hand is different. You could look at a slate tomorrow, the size, the scope, the contest, the player, the salary ranges, everything, and go, well, based on these concepts, I think a good strategy is to do this. I think a lot of people will do this, and if I do this, I will get more value doing this way. And then once you start doing it over and over again, you see common themes. And now once, just like in poker, you start processing information so much quicker. I remember when I started playing poker, I was analyzing my hand histories for 2-4 limit hold'em online, right? So literally I would play for 4 hours and then analyze literally every hand. Every single, like on a 2-4 limit hold'em game, because this is before Poker Tracker. This is before you could just import this into a software and have it do it for you. And then seeing where my leaks are. It's like, was this the right decision here based on this? And I'm reading books over and over again. Like that's, to me, I'm more of that type of learner. I was the kid that when they got the video game would not plug it in until I read the entire instruction booklet.
Wow.
Right. So the way I say things is that I think that I've done so much content in this industry, from live shows, from, for 3-4 years, soccer podcasts from way back or anything, said if you listen to it, just listen to it all. And I'll say that to people. I said, so you really expect me to go back? There's 80 episodes of the Theory of DFS podcast. Their average is like 2 hours of length, right? So that's 160 hours. I've done like 400 of my morning shows, which average about 45 minutes to an hour, right? So there's like, what, 500 hours of that content. And I'll say, so just go back and then listen to everything, even on slates that were from 2 years ago. And if you listen at all, I don't know what else more I could tell you, because I've explained everything so many times that you should be able to get it by now. And their response is, so you really expect me to do that? And I'm not joking when I say this. It sounds like I am. I said, it's exactly what I would do. Because when I played DFS, when I started playing DFS, I was watching shows on competing sites from 2 years ago. Because I basically, like Jonathan Bales, like I respected his work and how his mind thought about DFS. So I'm like, I want to watch every show that this guy has been on. And you know what I did? I watched every show that guy was on, because he wasn't like a regular host. So it's not like you're watching like every single day, but I must have watched 100 hours of video and audio, NFL slates from 2013. And I'm not even playing NFL. I'm playing soccer DFS. And I'm just, how does he think about the game? And just watching it, especially, like I said before, I work for myself. I get it. You have a life and whatever like that. But if you want to get on that level, what can you control? All you can control is what you do, not the luck of what happens in a game. So I'm the type of person, at least, that if I had a regular job, and I did when I started playing poker, I had a regular job, but the commute back to work, I read poker books, right? When I got home, I like literally during work, I could think of nothing else other than poker. I did my job horribly. I'm a horrible employee, but that's all I could think about. Like literally not like get home, not sit at the dinner table. And it's like I'm printing out my hand histories and going through. I'm spending 2 hours and going through it. Then after that, I'm reading this book again. And then I'm playing for an hour. And then I'm going to check and 16 hours of like nothing, thinking of nothing else other than that until you get to the point where you don't have to spend 16 hours anymore because things are coming quickly. This all sounds so daunting, but like it is my personality. So like to me, I don't find that difficult to do.
It's helpful to be obsessive to get to be a good DFS player. I think I've heard several people say that it's one way to be good is if you're obsessed with it, that's how you get good, is you just put in the time because you love doing it. I mean, that's ultimately like, I don't think that I knew about the Theory of DFS podcast until you were maybe 40 episodes in. And I've probably listened to at least the majority of the episodes that you did before I ever discovered it, because I'm kind of obsessive about DFS too, because I want to hear, everything that you are saying and that your various guests are saying too. So I went back and I listened to a lot of those, and I don't actually think it's that much to ask, because if you love DFS and if you really want to be good, you'll probably enjoy doing it and hearing, the different things people are talking about. So I think that's probably a reasonable thing to ask, to go back and listen to shows, because it's not like you're asking people to go back and listen to really boring content. It's stuff that they're wanting to learn, and it's a great way to learn. All right, we've gotten a little bit, we haven't gotten that far into all my questions, so I'm going to bring us back to talking about your background a little bit more. I got sidetracked and asked you some other questions just because they came up, but
this is what happens when you host, Neil. See, you gotta steer.
I never do this to you though. When I'm your guest, I never lead you off track, or I guess I do sometimes. I ask questions that are completely out of the blue, but typically, I don't steer you the wrong way, or when I'm the guest, I don't lead you astray. But I guess, you're right. I gotta get us back on track. All right, you said that you got started in DFS in 2015 is when you started playing. What drew you in?
I only watch soccer. Now, I used to be a humongous sports fan when I was younger. I played in rotisserie baseball leagues, fantasy basketball, hockey, anything. So I go back to season long, back when I was a teenager. And even in my early 20s, like, either home leagues or Yahoo leagues or CBS Sports Line leagues, paid. And for rotisserie baseball, I was hardcore into rotisserie style baseball. With like deep rosters and everything, and auctions, like a $200 entry fee, like we meet in person, a live draft, like that type of stuff. But once you get to in my mid-20s, I was playing poker, and I just didn't care that much about sports anymore, other than soccer. I've been a big soccer fan since probably maybe the '94 World Cup. So I've always followed soccer no matter what. So in 2015, we got a USL team, a Division II professional soccer team here, and I joined their supporters group, and I'm active very much in the local soccer scene here. And because I only watch soccer on like NBC Sports and I don't know, well, back then it was Fox Sports, but on the channels where like DraftKings and FanDuel weren't even advertising, right? So like I didn't even know these sites existed until I heard them on some podcasts, and I thought they were these like probably some like challenge games. I remember Sporting News, the back of the Sporting News, pick your guys, mail them in, and maybe you win $1 million, like type of like promotional Publishers Clearinghouse type of thing. So I kind of just, okay, whatever it is, it is. And then someone in the supporters group knew that, I would very smart at math, very good at games. And he played on DraftKings and said, you know more about the Premier League than anyone else that I know. Do you play on DraftKings? I go, no. He said it's fantasy soccer, and I've played the official FPL Fantasy Premier League game, but that is very similar to what like the person that wins out of like 600,000 people or something gets like a firm handshake and like a $20 bill or something. Mm-hmm. So most people play for fun. So I thought it was something like that, and then I looked into it. I'm like, okay, I'll look into it. And the lobby looked like the online poker lobby. Different games, different stakes, different everything. It's like, this looks semi-familiar. Mm-hmm. And I said, I know the Premier League. I could play the Premier League Stop it. Here's a $5 contest. Here's a $1 contest. So I deposited $400. I learned the scoring system. And of course, what did I do before even entering a lineup? I go on Google and I go daily fantasy soccer. And I just like anything that I could find. And especially back then, and even now, there isn't that much daily fantasy soccer content.
Yeah. So you read the 2 articles out there.
Right. So just going through, just finding just basic stuff, basic strategy. Because I knew it's a game. Someone had to have written something about this or shows. And I found a video here and there, an article, and it was okay based on this. Okay. And then I selected a lineup. I played a couple of contests, and I was playing like 10 or $20 a slate. And then it would just be like EPL on Saturdays and some Sundays, MLS on Wednesdays and some Saturday nights. So I was playing like maybe 3 or 4 slates a week, and just basically learning how to play and seeing that the same people are in my contest and go, let me take a look at Saramek's lineup because this guy seems to be all over the place and winning, right? Let me take a look at this Pew Pew Pew, right? Old _T. I don't know who this guy is, but these guys are in everything. They must be good at this. How is my lineup different from theirs? And then I go from that to, oh, they have an ability to download a CSV of your contests. It's like, and I'm fine in Excel. It's like, oh, so I could, instead of clicking through and looking at each lineup individually, I could just get it on a spreadsheet. Okay, let me do that. And that's all I did. I was playing $10-20 and just like, let me study they're playing these types of players more than those types of players. Oh, set piece. Oh, because they take set pieces. Oh, because they're wide. Oh, because they're a fullback and they're cheap and they're on a favored team. And then you start piecing these things together. And then next thing you know, 2 months later, my lineups like in like double ups and everything were like 2v2s off of them. Like I got like most of like, okay, if I jam this in and whatever like that, all these goal dependent forwards aren't worth playing back then in that scoring system. So I learned how to play DFS that way. And then on Boxing Day, which is the day after Christmas, all the soccer teams, all the Premier League teams play. I went up and down. I had that $400 deposit and would go up and down a little here and there, a little there, little on MLS down there. And then I won a whole bunch of satellite tickets into their like $20 Boxing Day contest, which was an absurd entry fee for me. Right. Even though I had plenty of money, but to me, this wasn't an investable thing yet. Right. So I was just playing around with it. So I won like $8 $20 tickets. So I was like, wow, I'm playing plus that. I'm playing for like $250 on the slate, which is like 5 times more than we normally play. And then I came in like, I came in like 5th, 9th, 12th. Like I captured like 5 of the top 20 spots. And then ended up up $2,400.
Nice.
So it's like, nice. And of course, what do you do after that? You're like, well, they normally have a $27 GPP that's like that structure. I think I'm good enough to play that now. So my $2,400 within 2 months was back down to $400, right? Because the variance of playing and everything.
Yep.
And then during that time period, that prompted me to learn more, study CSVs. And from that 400, I got all the way back down to 400. And from that 400 by October, I turned that 400 into about $16,000 or so. And then
this is 2016 now.
Yeah, 2016, right. I played a little baseball during the summer, right? Because they had the Euros, the Euros were 2016 for soccer. Mm-hmm. So they had some Euros contests, but also it's like, well, I'll play Major League Baseball. I'll try that. And there was much more content on fantasy, on daily DFS, MLB DFS. So I read a ton of stuff on that. And I learned correlation and leverage and all the concepts. Not because people wrote about those concepts, is because they were kind of writing about how to be different. It's like, what does that really mean mathematically?
Right.
Because I knew it's like, there has to be someone that wrote the theory of DFS. My whole time since 2015 was there. Poker, there's all these books. Enough people play this game. There has to be the theory of DFS, just like there's the theory of poker and poker. And the only thing I found was the Bales books, the Fantasy Football for Smart People. And he does talk somewhat about game theory in there, but it's still very basic stuff that I would suggest to beginners. And it's like I can't find any like like more higher level 2+2 publishing poker level type of stuff. And until 2016, 2017, ownership projections, more optimizers, and then you get more of that content. But even as of 2019 or whatever, 2020, when I put out Theory of DFS, it's like the whole time I'm like, if no one's going to do this, I'm going to do it, because there has to be something like this where it's not a matter of watching a 60-minute show and getting like 4 minutes of like, I'd love for them to talk about that a little bit more, and not like 56 minutes of who to play at third base.
I'm curious now. Now you're talking about how you came up with the Theory of DFS course. How did you find James McCool to be your? Because he's the co-author with you on the Theory of DFS podcast. So how did you guys kind of come together? Did you approach him to do it?
Yes.
It sounds like it was
I mean,
idea.
I've known him around the industry. I know he worked with a couple other sites. The main thing that since I think more conceptually, I consider myself an intuitive conceptual type of player, not an analytical player. Not, I'm not running numbers. I'm using other people's stuff. I understand how they're made, but can I do that myself? Well, no. I'd rather outsource that. That's one thing you learn in business. Whatever your core competency is you never outsource your core competency, but you outsource everything else. So my core competency in DFS or in poker or anything is typically reading other people, right? Reading other people and devising strategies to exploit them. So like same thing in digital marketing. How could I sell more things for less cost per acquisition? And how do I finagle that? And it could be the most weirdest of strategies, but if it works, it works. I don't even have to question why. I'm not even sure why it does, but it does. And then I try to take those concepts and put it into another industry or into another facet and just test things out. So since I teach from that perspective, that conceptual / intuitive perspective, I need an analytical person. I need someone that could say, well, this is conceptually how projections are made. I could do them, but then I'm never going to do them as good as other people that's what their core competency is. So I need to bring someone that does do that does do projection models, that does do simulations, that does do those types of things, no matter if they're the best in the industry or not, but at least they're able to then explain the details of what conceptually it is. It's like, okay, this is what a normal distribution is. Right? What's a Monte Carlo simulation? Like, can you explain? I'd rather not be the one to explain it. I'd rather be someone that actually does it, that would be explaining it. So that's the main reason why James is on board, because he works with Excel and statistics and modeling like every day. That's what he does. So I think I could teach the concepts well, but having like the data analyst as backup. So I don't just come across as like, well, you're just pulling out these concepts out of nowhere. I have like, here's the proof of that. This is how it actually works.
So he complements your approach pretty nicely. How long did it take you guys then to create the Theory of DFS masterclass?
I think maybe in total, maybe 80 hours.
Okay, that's not too
something
bad.
Like that. It's a 15-hour course. I think we recorded close to 20 hours. But when I say close to 20 hours, like there were a lot of pauses. Like what you hear is extremely edited.
Okay.
Because I edited everything to remove pauses, to remove coughs, to remove, if you're going to sell this thing, it's got to sound good. There were
different than our
points.
Podcast.
Right. There's not it's not a podcast. It's more like a seminar.
Yeah. So
there are points where I may have repeated myself, where like I kind of repeated. I go off on a 3-minute thing that it's like I really just re-explain what I just said. I don't think this is necessary, and cut it out. Or James would chime in and kind of say the same thing that I said before. It's like, okay, we don't need that. So like I could cut out a whole bunch of stuff that why you listening to repetitive stuff or something that just doesn't sound explanatory enough. And then I repeat, and then I would redo it again. But we just left it running. So I knew that it's like, okay, these 3 minutes, I'm going to start over and do it this way. And so a lot of times I would pause in between sentences just to gather my thoughts and go, what would be the next thing to say? So there are a lot of 5-second pauses between a lot of things. I don't want to have that in the course. So like a heavy amount of editing for that. Obviously, we had to outline everything beforehand, but it was mostly a conversation. It's very similar to Stokastic type of shows. Like if you had a conversation about that, but we had a Google Doc in front of us going, we have to hit these things, mostly in this order. And sometimes it would be 10 minutes, sometimes it would be 8 minutes, sometimes it would be 22 minutes. And we'd try to hit everything like that. And then from there, obviously, I did all the stuff with the website, and I hired someone to make the design of the quote book to make it look like that. And I turned all that stuff into social media images, connected all the, it had the email list. And because I mean, that type of stuff that's my core competency. So I'm going to do all of that myself. But throughout all of that, it, pretty much like 80 hours. It for the 20 hours of audio, it took me twice as long to edit. Right? It typically takes you about twice as long, 2 to 3 times as long as the piece is, in order for you to edit it properly. So, like out of 20 hours of audio, I spent about 40 hours editing it, just to get the pieces off here. He was too low over there. Let me increase his volume so we're about even. I mean, I'm going to normalize it at the end anyway. So there's a lot of work to make sure that if you listen to it, you could listen to it in bits. You could listen chapter by chapter. You could revisit chapters and go like, 5 months down the road, let me go revisit this again. Because the way that I learned how to play poker was to just read books over and over and over again, even if I already did, because you're going to pick something else up as you play. So read, play, reread, play. So the course is really designed as a seminar where you could listen to the whole thing all the way through, but understand that's not going to be the only time that you listen to this. You're going to listen to the whole thing, then maybe you play for a couple of weeks. And then maybe while you play, you notice something. It's like, yeah, that's very similar. Why I chose that guy is very similar to a concept that I remember in chapter 6. Let me go revisit chapter 6 to see if I'm getting this right. And then you go, I think I am picking this up. And then you play some more. And then maybe once a new sport comes, new season, NBA season starting up, it's like, okay, listen to the whole 15 hours again and just go. You never know, even though you listened to it before, since you've been playing and getting better, hopefully, and applying these concepts better and quicker, that maybe the next time you run through, you go, yeah, you're right. Maybe you're doing a lot too much of one thing and too little of another thing. You go, yeah, now that you mention it, I think I'm relying way too much on this, or I'm weighting this way too much. I care too much about correlation in NFL, and I should be, instead of having these types of stats, have those types of stats. Maybe that would be slightly better on certain contests. So kind of like the course is meant for, like, as anyone else making a product, I made the thing that I would have wanted to listen to in 2015.
Right. Okay. You timestamp. If you listen on the website, you timestamp the different concepts that you go over, which is probably helpful in re-listening to it if you do want to go back and revisit different concepts. Let me take a minute away from this conversation with Jordan Cooper to remind you to give us a like and subscribe so you can keep up with all of our shows, DFS offers, giveaways, and much more. Once you subscribe, hit that notification button to get alerts when our shows go live. Be sure to also check out our monthly podcast giveaway. Just subscribe to our podcast channel and leave a 5-star review with your Stokastic username or Twitter handle to be entered to win a free month of Stokastic Plus Platinum. All right, so getting back to more general questions. So we've kind of covered your background to the extent that I wanted to do it chronologically. So just more general questions at this point. We'll get into some. I got a ton of listener questions that we're going to cover. So I'll intersperse my questions.
What kind of listener questions could they be?
I know. Who are these people that have all these questions? A lot of the questions we got are just joke questions that I'm throwing out or lumping together. We can talk about more general concepts. I've already crossed a few out that we sort of alluded to briefly. More jokey questions that I was maybe not going to ask anyway. But I'll start with a couple of my own questions. So, in which sport or sports do you think that you have the biggest edge?
I would, at this point, I would guess MMA, because they're the duplication advantage there. I think to realize that edge, that's tough, but I think it's the biggest edge there. But if I had to bet on any sport that I would play, against someone randomly in a head-to-head, it would be soccer. So like to me, my best sport from a cash game / small field GPP perspective, that I'll bet you give me a Premier League or a Champions League slate. You give me any slate, dude. You could give me a weird soccer slate where I have to go and look up the stats of these guys, like, and no one could possibly project this well. Like, I'm like that's gonna be my bread and butter. Yes, the soccer lobby is very tough on DraftKings. If you're gonna play against the regulars, I don't want to play against the regulars because neither of us are gonna beat the rake. But you're going to step in those waters, boy. It's a steep learning curve because you're going to get your head smashed in. But since I've been playing soccer DFS for almost 7 years now, so it may not be the one that I have the biggest edge in, but I think that it'll always be profitable for me.
Okay. So MMA probably the biggest edge relative to the field. Soccer, so my impression just based on our conversations about soccer is that even though you're very good at it, there's not as many weak players in soccer. Would you agree with that? That at least in the cash setting, there's not a ton of weak players. So it's harder to realize that edge because you just don't have as many opportunities against weak opponents.
Right. I mean, a lot of times, like, unless you want to play against the best players in the lobby, you just can't get that much volume down. Right. It's more of that type of thing. Yeah, sure. I'll do what I normally do. I'll post my head-to-heads up to typically $215. And sometimes I don't sell any. I mean, sometimes, and all my blocks on DraftKings are soccer people. Right. So it's because there's enough people that play all the major sports when I do play cash that if I get paired up with people, who cares? Mm-hmm. Right. I'll ship my money. Right. We'll have a baseball head-to-head, a basketball head-to-head. If the auto match, the $5 ones, whatever happens. But in soccer, it's just like, nope, I just want to make sure, that I don't get auto match with Red Coat or Saramac or Pew or Fear My Turtle or any of those. Even though other than Red Coat doesn't mind taking action against everyone. Most people won't even take your games anyway. So it's like, sometimes the blocks aren't even necessary. But that also leads to a fact of like, I enter all these contests in soccer on a Saturday, and I have my upcoming entries is like $3,500, and then when it locks, I have $632 in play because nothing else got taken, and I guess that is what it is. So so like to me, soccer is maybe in the large field GPPs you could play, but those are tough. They're very top heavy in soccer. They try to promote this 10K to first, like $150 to like 8th place. And like those curves are just so stupid that like I just don't even bother. So like I'll play typically the main like 120, whatever the 121 or 220, 222, like GPP, which isn't a single entry. I'll just play one entry into that. And then I'll just play basically a cash. Play all the double ups, all the triple ups, all that. Like I'll be in every contest in the entire lobby for that one lineup, and then just build that one lineup, and that's what I play. But I love soccer DFS, but the main reason why after a year and a half of primarily playing soccer DFS, as I moved to the other sports, is because even back then, just the liquidity really wasn't there. The edge, the soft action. Going after the bad players, there just weren't enough of them. That it's like, I think there's more money to be made in MLB, NFL, NBA. And that's really how I transitioned from being a soccer DFS player primarily, like from 2015 to 2017. And a lot of people don't know that. But if you went back then, you would know me as a soccer guy. Like you don't play anything else other than soccer specialist. And now it's 2022, and I tell people, it's like, no, my best sport is soccer DFS. I go, you play soccer DFS? It's like, dude, that's what I was like known for 5 years ago. Like you didn't know me from 5 years ago. So like to me, that's how I view that I'm not going to play every interleague 2-game slate on a Friday for the French league because like first place is $500 in the main GPP, and the entire head-to-head lobby are all sharps. So it's like, why am I bothered? Yeah, it's 2:00 in the afternoon. Yes, I'm not doing anything else, but I could better spend my time than chase after what could possibly be a 1% edge at best.
And And you've talked about this. We've talked about this a lot on the Theory of DFS, and you've talked about elsewhere that, in general, a big part of your approach to DFS is contest selection and trying to find the weakest opponents, or the contests that have the most weak opponents in it, that you have a clear edge over it. So it makes sense that if soccer is getting to be too good in general, if the field is getting too good, that's a big part of the reason that you moved on to all these other sports. And now, so MMA, do you think that MMA is the weakest field currently in a large field GPP?
Based on what I play, yes. I mean, there could be other sports. I mean, I don't play all the sports, so I don't know. Probably in the niche sports, you could, if you're a specialist in the niche sports, there's probably tons of edge there. If you're great at college basketball, college football, League of Legends, the showdown golf, who knows? Who knows what it is? It just so happens that soccer was it because I followed soccer. That it's really, I wasn't drawn because it was a niche sport and I wanted to make money playing DFS. It was literally the only sport I followed. So what else am I going to play? But in MMA, based on the contest data I got it only because of COVID, right? Because all the sports went down, and then like the German Bundesliga in soccer came back. So I'm like, okay, I have something to play. And then golf kind of came back a little. So I'm like, okay, I'll throw some stuff into golf. And then it's like, oh, they're going to do Fight Island. Dana White's going to be in wherever in the Middle East. Like, there's nothing going on. So it's like, why can't I learn? I'll learn a new sport. And then once I looked at MMA, I'm like, this feels a lot like NFL Showdown. Mm-hmm. This feels a lot like, dude, I'm aiming for uniques and stuff like that. And then I download some CSVs from the first couple of contests, and I'm like, God, some of these contests there are more duplicated entries than you find in NFL Showdown, obviously, because in NFL Showdown, there are actually more players to choose from, and there's a captain slot, but in MMA, there's not even a captain slot. So we would have these like 13 fight cards, and I'd find lineups that were duplicated 100 times, 150 times. They'd be like 27% of the field is lineups that are duplicated more than 50 times or more than 30 times. And I'm like these lineups can't be profitable. And then I look at what are the best players doing, right? Because that's what are the best players do? Oh, as expected, they have more uniques, more under fives. And then you start running the projections on them and everything, and you go, okay, to me, this is not a game of MMA. It's a game of who can build lineups that are more unique, that still have a high enough win probability. And to me, then it doesn't come down to knowing the fighters. It just comes down to building lineups better. And it has gotten a little bit better over the course of 2 years, but not that much better.
Yeah, so you say that it doesn't come down to knowing the fighters, but that's the whole qualitative versus quantitative conversation that you and I have had, that I had with Brian Jester, and you had yesterday, or this week on you had a different guest on this week on the Theory of DFS, where you talked about that a little bit, how the Sims often get it wrong, you think, in calculating the EV of different lineups because they're not doing that qualitative analysis. So how important do you think that it is to know the fighters in MMA, to know like the styles of fighting?
I think context is key. I think that the concepts I think knowing DFS game theory concepts is worth more than knowing the sport in general. But knowing the sport is an edge, right? If you're better at predicting basketball rotations, you're going to have an edge, but that's like the last 5% edge. The first 95% is just knowing how to play the game well. So as long as you know how to play the game well, and then you get the extra 5%, then you're one of the best players in the world. So like, there is a point in knowing sport. I'm the type of person, I don't watch the games, I don't care, whatever. Like, you can, but that can't be where you start from. You have to understand what projection, leverage, correlation, all the concepts of DFS. Duplication in a sport like MMA or NFL Showdown, and how all those variables interact with one another. And then from there, it's like, okay, where are the high variance fights? Because these mean projections may mean nothing, right? Got 62. So like neither fighter's getting a 62. One guy's getting finished and the other guy's getting knocked out. It's gonna be either this goes the distance and no one scores well, or one guy gets 120 points. Yes, the middle is 62. But no one scores. No, it's going to be 20 or 120. But how would you know that? Like, one way is the betting lines. Obviously, ones that are less likely to inside the distance, right? That type of thing. But just knowing that it's two people that don't have gas tanks. One's a submission grappler. The other person's a knockout artist. It's like the inside the distance. Fight does not go to the distance. Minus 700. It's like, expect this to be a high variance fight, which means one guy's going to score a lot and one guy's going to score very little. So typically those are the fights that you're looking for in GPP. Now in double ups, you probably avoid them like the plague, because if you get it wrong, you're going to get 5 points or something. So like that's what I mean by context of, like, if you're just looking at mean or median projections, like, you could see even if you want to extend that over to the standard deviation, like, you still may not get what that really means. And this comes back to, you could have all the tools in front of you that you have. A Stokastic, I look at stuff here all the time, right? That in MLB and NBA, I'm either looking because I think the information is good, or even if I didn't think the information was good, I know other people are looking at it, right? So it's one of the two. But if you're looking at something and it's like, oh, well, the standard deviation of these two fighters are way high. Now, conceptually, if you don't understand statistics, like we talked about before, well, what does standard deviation mean? Like, if you don't understand what standard deviation, you just see it as a number. And people would go like, oh, you want higher standard deviation fighters. And then what ends up happening is someone thinks they have the magic bullet, and they go, well, I'm just going to place the 6 highest standard deviation fighters together. And then they wonder why that they're constantly getting 4 winners and 2 losers, 5 winners and 1 loser. They're not getting 6 winners. And then one of the lower standard deviation fighters puts up like 98 points and is in the winning lineup at 7,600 or something. And they're like, but you're telling me to play the high variance fighters. It's like, that. Do you understand what that means? It just means that that 0 or 120 rather than 20 or 100, but it doesn't mean that like because they're all high variance, like, what are your chances in 12 fights that you get all the 6 high variance fights right, and they all end up being optimal? Not necessarily the highest. Right. So you may have to mix in some lower standard deviation fighters, because that is actually more probable and it's still unique. So it's like, how do you take all these concepts and weigh one against the other? And when you have just numbers on a screen, I understand what they mean. But if you don't understand probability and statistics, just the basics, you're not learning formulas. You don't have to go and sit here and do math, really, even in your head. Right. But just what does this conceptually look like? What does this number mean? When someone says that the top the baseball player, right? This basketball player, right? We'll see on this basketball slate. Nikola Jokic has a X% chance of being in the optimal line, right? Well, first off, do you have to have the optimal lineup?
Probably not.
No. Typically, no one has the optimal lineup, and that doesn't have some weird players in it.
Yeah.
Right? Okay. And then why is Jokic has such a high probability to be in the optimal lineup? Is it because he's projected for so much? Or is it because there's like 2 low-priced basketball players? You get one of those slates where someone's injured and like there's a guy that's at 4K that should be 7,500. And because you could jam in 2 so highly projected players at 4K or 3K, means that most likely the high Giannis and Jokic and LeBron and whoever is more likely to show up in the optimal lineup. So if you just looked at those numbers and say, well, I got to play Jokic now, but I'm going to fade, but I can't play the 4K guy because he's chalky. I'm going to fade. He's 86% owned, right? Right. They project to be 86% owned, and I go, well, I'm going to fade. They're going to use the concept of leverage, right? They're going to go, I'm going to fade because I'm going to fade the highest owned player. And it's like, they don't understand that the guy that's 86% owned should be 96% owned. Right. They're under-owned actually for their price. And if you don't use that guy, the likelihood of Jokic being in the optimal lineup goes significantly down. So now they're building a lineup with Jokic a different 4K guy and a different construction, and they're going, well, based on the numbers that I saw on Stokastic, like that should have been a good lineup. And I'll look at it and like go, no, because one thing has to go with the other, right? You have to understand the reasonings behind what you're looking at, not basketball reasonings, but why certain things are the way they are. Why would this come up more than that? We see the cheap pitchers always have positive leverage, right? These cheapies that are going to be 1% owned or less, there's like, well, they have a 2% chance of being in the optimal, which is twice as much as their ownership. So it looks like, why are we jamming in cheap pitchers? Well, the cheap pitchers are only more optimal in lineups typically with a stud pitcher also, right? Not two cheap pitchers. Once you put two 1% owned $5,800 garbage cans in the lineup, your optimal rate goes down significantly, right? But you're looking at just a chart of two things. And it's like, well, these two are the highest leverage pitchers. Let me play them. Like, that's you looking for a magic bullet, not understanding the concepts of the numbers. You have the numbers, right? This is getting right back to the 95% of people don't use it.
Yep.
You have the stuff. It's all in front of you. If you just took the time to simply learn basic probability and statistics, you'll go, oh, now I get how all these things interact with one another.
Would you agree that this is a bigger problem for hand builders than people using optimizers? Using the example you gave of the Jokic and the 86% owned $4,000 player, if you X out that 86% owned 4K player, an optimizer is going to give you less Jokic naturally if you're using it correctly, because the optimizer is trying to build the optimal lineups based on, you know, your settings and what you're telling it to do. So it'll naturally give you less Jokic. Whereas, so it's a bigger issue for hand builders who are trying to X out that player and still use Jokic. Would you agree?
Right, but optimizer people, the optimizer bros, the opto bros, right? They've another problem on their hand. So yes, the hand builders have that problem, right? And I believe that you could learn so much more of hand building before you touch an optimizer. Yeah. Because then you'll learn the lineup dynamics. If you pay down here, you got to pay up there. If people are going to put together what you think people are going to do, and then go, well, if they're going to do this, that means this player has to be less owned, right? It's natural. You're going to go, people are going to people are going to jam in Embiid. People are going to jam in this guy, this cheap power forward that's 4K. They're going to jam in this cheap point guard that's 4K. And then and this is what they're probably going to do. And then you look and you go, well, anyone that does this, well, who can't they have? Well, they probably can't have Kevin Durant or something like that. So it's like, well, then you build a lineup with Kevin Durant in it, right? Like, just simply that of like, well, how do you get different? Like, that's what an optimizer is going to eventually do for you, right? Once you tell it what to do. But once you see in real time that you're just doing it slowly, just like I studied the hand histories in my online poker, you see it very slowly. And then once you do that over and over and over and over again, you build multiple lineups. Well, people are going to do this? They're not going to do that. But they're also not going to do this. They're also not going to do that. And you see different construction types and go, well, I'm going to play that guy. And you can still look at the projections to see who are the better point per dollar plays or anything like that. And just start figuring out, how do I get a 3v3, a 4v4? If people are going to pay down at center, they're going to pay up at point guard. Let me pay up for Rudy Gobert. Let me pay 8. No one's paying 8K for that range. How does that change my lineup construction? And maybe you still put it into an optimizer and go, I'm going to manually put in my lineup into and lock the players in and go, well, this lineup projects mean-wise for X amount of points. And you see what people are more likely to do is like 4 points higher. So it's like, well, you're playing large field GPP. Like 4 points of projection is not that much to sacrifice for being that significantly different. You got yourself a good GPP lineup, right? Doing it things slow like that. Once you learn how to do that, then you could start going to an optimizer, whichever one of choice that you want to use, and then not look at these things as just like magic settings and go, I could visualize the lineups that I want to play, and use it as a research tool, even run 100 lineups that don't have that player in. And what do they look like? That have this one in. What do they look like? And then go, well, okay, I want more of this and less of that. And you start piecing things together where you can visualize. A lot of times when I use an optimizer, I'm putting stuff in and I almost know what's going to come out. I know I'm going to get a lot of this team and that team. I know I'm going to get a lot of that player and that player. I know the more I play this cheap guy, the more I'm going to get that expensive guy. And the more I don't play that guy, the more I'm going to get a mid-range build. And then once you start learning that the optimizer is there as a tool, you tell it what to do, then you start to use it more properly. What ends up happening, though, like I said, the opto bros have their own problem, is that if they're using it as a let it decide what lineups to build, the problem is that you're using mean projections, right? And mean projections aren't like, they may be fine for cash games, but that's not representative of a player's actual range of outcomes. It's closer in basketball, obviously, because that's much more normally distributive. But just because you have the highest mean projection doesn't mean you have the best lineup. And this is outside of even like just the ownership perspective of like the lineup that's more likely, even if you took like a 50-50 contest where everyone's just trying to build the best mean lineup out of 10. If you took the top 10 mean lineups and everyone agreed on the projections, right? Everyone agreed on it, on what the mean projections were, but the floor and the ceilings are different for each player. It's quite possible in the first top 10 of mean projections that the most likely lineup to win first out of those 10 is the 8th lineup. Mm-hmm. Like that, it's possible the 8th lineup actually performs the best, then the 2nd, then the 5th, then the 1st. Even though the 1st has a higher mean projection, based on the players in that lineup, in the 8th person's lineup, have slightly higher here, slightly lower there. So based on this non-normal distributive, because it's close, basketball, it's at least closer. Yeah. But like in baseball, like these players don't have normal distributions. So if you're just a slave to the optimizer, a lot of times if you're optimizing for mean, you'll see, you'll know it what I'm talking about in most sports. It wants to jam in those cheap point per dollar guys, right? There's some leadoff hitter that's $2,200. It wants that 74% of your lineups as a one-off because their mean projection is 6.8 for 2,000, and they're also going to be high owned because of it. They're going to be, right, 18% owned. And then you go, well, what if I don't play him as a one-off? We said, well, whatever team that guy's on, you're going to get a lot of that stack, right? Also, and just because he has a 6.8 mean projection for 2K doesn't mean that he's more likely to be in the winning lineup or not, or anything. And like, it's actually could be detrimental. So then what ends up happening is you take him out, and then it starts jamming in the $2,300 player that's batting 6th for some road team with a 4.5 point total, because that's the best point per dollar value. And if you don't know how to rectify kind of these situations, you end up with a lot of those same type of looking lineups that, if you simulated them out, may actually be much worse lineups than lineups that are more balanced builds. Mm-hmm. Or where you're paying instead of paying 2 stud pitchers, you're paying down slightly for an 8K pitcher, so you don't have to play the 2K guy. It may actually have a 2-point lower mean projection, but actually have a higher win probability because of that 2K player's range of outcomes may be really narrow and doesn't have many, his 90 percentile outcome isn't all that high. So it's like, that's the downside of using optimizers as the optimizer tells you what to do instead of you telling it what to do.
Yeah. And I think you and I are similar in that I was hand building lineups for 6 years before I ever used an optimizer. So I came into using an optimizer from the perspective of, how do I get this thing to do what I've been doing for 6 years already? And I think you come from the same kind of, probably not 6 years because you didn't start in 2013, but at least a few years of hand building before you ever use an optimizer. Is that true?
Yeah. I mean, soccer, I always hand build my lineups because I didn't play that many. I played, at the 15 lineups when I was playing large field stuff, and I would just hand build them. Golf, when I got into golf, I was hand building. I'll build 20, 60 lineups. I just build them by hand. I tally them up on a sheet of paper to make sure I'm not getting too much of one guy or the other guy. And then in baseball, I was building like 10 lineups in baseball. Mm-hmm. Basketball, I was when I won my first 100,000 in basketball. Those were all hand built lineups. Like literally all, like I think maybe 12 to 15 lineups. that day. Hand built them all. And just going through it with the same concepts. I still looked at projections and go, well, this, piece this together and go, okay. That satisfies all the concepts of what that lineup should look like, and then go to the next one and go to the next one. And then once you start to figure out that, what you're doing is actually profitable, and it's like, well, how do I make more of these? And then once you get down to how do you make more of these, then it becomes not feasible to be making 40, 50, 60, 80 lineups by hand, because you're going to be sitting. I mean, dude, it would take me 45 minutes just to build 15 to 20 lineups. Imagine me building four times more than that.
Yeah.
That'd be ridiculous.
Yeah, just not feasible. This has been part 1 of my conversation with Jordan Cooper. You'll be able to find part 2 next Friday on the Stokastic YouTube channel or wherever podcasts live at 3 Eastern. Thanks for watching.